you are all part of a community of pioneers, and it's not easy to be a pioneer, but it's really exciting, and you kind of get swept up in it, and so none of us does this alone, and I always feel when I go to conferences, and I'm not nearly at the level of Gary as far as conference junkie, but I gone to a lot of conferences, and without symposia and conferences, I don't think I could do what I'm doing today, because it's not only the knowledge that you learn, but it's the energy you derive from other souls who are as enthused as you think you are, but you need that kind of camaraderie and that support, that special support that helps us kind of do that thing that the Japanese call ichigaya. You know what ichigaya is? It's not the guy down at the end of the bench that's scratching himself. Ichigaya, I guess, and I'm not Japanese, and I apologize to the Japanese if I'm not doing this quite right, but ichigaya is what you get up in the morning for. And I think it's a tremendous gift to be involved in this endeavor, because it is something very worthwhile to get up in the morning for, and it's a lot to do, but I would rather have it this way than kind of wondering about, okay, who am I, what am I supposed to do, and why am I here? When we're involved in this kind of work, you know exactly why you're here, and it's very energizing, and so I thank you, Stephen, for a tremendous, your support too. You have been a brother. Okay, now, I have designed a presentation that, let's see here if I can get this thing off. I've designed a presentation that will be for people who are just starting out. So for those of you that are here today that have not done much IV vitamin C, this is for you. For those of you that have done vitamin C for many, many years, hopefully this will fill in maybe some gaps in your understanding. And for those of you that are somewhere in the middle, I'm hoping it will reinforce what you're doing and give you additional motivation. Perhaps the greatest, perhaps the greatest piece of wisdom that Dr. Riordan, I think, imparted to us, and he imparted many, I know, was the idea of being co-learners. And as I mentioned earlier, his favorite saying is, you can't begin to learn what you think you already know. So there's a humility there in being a co-learner. There's also a huge relief. When I walk into a patient's room and I know I'm a co-learner, I put aside what I think I know and just kind of connect with that patient, and through that connection we learn from each other, and it frees me from having to pretend like I know everything. I can tell them freely if I don't know something, but if I do know something, I can help them learn, and we do work as co-learners together. And it's through that co-learning process that some of the therapeutic benefit of IV vitamin C occurs, and it's through that the true quality of life emerges. And so that's been the theme of our symposium this year, is quality of life. And I think no one can say that better than the patient, him or herself. And so we have a patient, Carol, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and we have a little short 3 to 4 minute presentation that I want to give you to demonstrate how much of a difference this has made in Carol's life.
What do you do when you're hit with the big C, cancer? It's a shock. I was afraid of the treatment, is what I feared the most. And so I started reading, and I started asking people, and I got some very good advice. From the moment I checked into the Riordan Clinic, I was impressed. Dr. Ron says the good thing about cancer is that you make a life change. The doctors care about you, not just your test results. They want to know about all of you, not just your cancer. And I got help. It was interesting to me from the start that the Riordan Clinic wanted me to be a co-learner. They wanted me to learn as much as I could about my cancer and all the ways in which I could be helped. Well, I hope I've learned a lot. Not only is the cancer gone from inside, everything has improved. Head to toe. Skin, nails, hair, teeth, eyes, everything. I feel stronger than I did 20 years ago, which is amazing because I thought I was healthy then. The gratitude trail at the Riordan Clinic is a very important place. Beautiful trees and peace. There's a serenity that you don't feel everywhere. It's just peaceful. I got my life back. It's a very precious gift. I'm still learning, and this old teacher wants to get an A+.
Okay, let's talk about the Riordan IVC protocol, because this is what has come to us over all these years of research that Dr. Riordan started, and even before him, Dr. Pauling, and all the many people that have come together around this idea of what we can do to help patients with serious illness. Cancer is just but one of many ways that IV vitamin C can help. So I'm going to give you some introductory remarks on what I understand the mechanisms of IV vitamin C are. We'll go through a treatment rationale and some of the biological factors that go along with IV vitamin C. Who should get this type of therapy? The inclusion criteria, the candidates for IV vitamin C. What are some of the precautions and side effects that we need to be aware of? How do we administer IV vitamin C? How does it fit with other concurrent therapies? And what conclusions can we draw from all of this? You can find the Riordan IVC protocol at riordanclinic.org under research, and so you can direct any patient there who wants, or any other doctor or colleague or someone who wants to learn more about it. All of our research papers that we've published here through the Riordan Clinic are there as well, both in abstracts and in full text. I also have, for those of you that have patients that want to watch a video, I did a talk called How Vitamin C Fights Cancer. That is at Health Hunter Online, healthhunteronline.org, one word, in Dr. Glenn Hyland's presentation from last year on IVC, chemotherapy, and radiation. Are they compatible? Excellent talk is also at that particular website. .org. We're a non-profit organization. So, without Dr. Riordan, though, I wouldn't even be standing up here, let alone doing the kind of work that all of us are doing. I mean, Hugh, we were talking earlier about balance and how great it is to be balanced and have a balanced lifestyle. And this guy was not balanced. He was imbalanced towards creativity. And to create a place like this took something very special, kind of you talk about a pioneer of pioneers. That's what Hugh was. And so we always, when I'm here, I always feel like he's here still in in the way that he touched this place. The whole design, the structure, the gratitude, everything has his mark on it. So we can be very thankful for what he has given us. And this is, of course, his favorite quote: "You can't begin to learn what you think you already know." That intellectual humility that keeps us looking for, deeper and deeper for the real truth of the matter. So what I want to give you is a kind of model, a cellular model of health and healing, because I really think of cancer as another wound. It's a wound that's not healing. And that puts it in a whole different framework than cancer as kind of an invasion of the body snatcher type of thing that comes out of nowhere and it's just an evil kind of... I'm not saying cancer is good, but when we start to see it, though, as a malfunctioning of a normal healing process, it changes the whole perspective. It really changed my thought process when I looked upon it as something gone awry that could otherwise be fixed. Because most patients, when they hear they have cancer, they think of it as a kind of death sentence or kind of like a evil spell that's been cast upon them. But in reality, it comes out of circumstances over which we do have some control. But first of all, we have to understand what has gone wrong. I worked in my dad's gas station for many years, and when someone came in with their oil light on, I didn't give them a piece of black tape and said, "Here, cover it up and you'll feel better." I said, "Let's go run it up on the lift, let's look at the gaskets, let's test some things." And that's really what we're all about here, is trying to find out the underlying causes, the root causes, and seeing whether or not we can help people make better choices in their lives, like Carol. And Carol she's so excited about what she's learned. So health is a state of balanced redox. This is from the cellular perspective. Injury is where that balance gets disrupted, and that's life. Everything in this world is out to get us in many ways, and as an organism we have to every day go out and be disrupted by toxins, by stress, by radiation, by bad foods, by you name it. There's so many things that disrupt our harmony, our balance, our homeostasis. And when that happens, we shift to an oxidized state, where we shift to a state of higher oxidation. And this is a very important signaling process within the body that starts repair unfolding, which is, of course, inflammation. And I wrote a little book on inflammation several years ago, and that changed my whole perspective on inflammation. Inflammation is not a bad thing. If we didn't have inflammation, we wouldn't be here either, because our ancestors got injured and disrupted and infected and everything else, but thanks to a very strong inflammatory system, they were able to survive. So we need inflammation for survival. Unfortunately, most of us live in an excessive pro-inflammatory state, which sets up other problems. But if the healing process is able to unfold properly, our health is restored. And this is a cycle that all of us go through every day, probably every hour. There are healings that are occurring, and we don't even know about it because the body is so elegant in its overall methods of healing. And yet, even the healing can be sick. And that's what I think cancer is. So Steve Hickey, who is really one of my favorite authors in this area, who wrote Cancer, Nutrition, and Survival, which I would recommend for all of you to sit down sometime. It's a lot there, but it's really a wonderful book. But he talks about the cellular redox environment as being necessarily reducing when we're in a state of health, slightly reduced in a state of health rather than oxidizing. But yet oxidation, we depend upon that too. We have to oxidize our food for metabolism and energy. We need oxidation for our white blood cells to kill all the various organisms, viruses, and whatnot that we come in contact with. And so oxidation acts as a cell signaling mechanism that is very important. But yet if it runs out of balance, it can cause, obviously, a lot of damage. So my perspective on cancer is that it's a maladaptive cellular response to sustained injury. And all of these various things, physical damage such as radiation, electromagnetic fields, trauma, irritants. I think somewhere I was reading how very often it's prior wounds from a war wound is often a site where cancer starts, or some kind of an irritant. Smoking is obviously, the cancer that comes from smoking can be due to the irritation of the tars and whatnot. Chronic chemical damage, carcinogens, toxic chemicals, heavy metals, pesticides. We've heard a lot at the symposium about how toxic our environment is, and we're exposed for long periods of time, and our children are bioaccumulating this to an even greater degree, which causes great concern to me. Having now a 14-month-old granddaughter, I'm concerned about this children thing because they've got a lot that they're going to have to deal with, and so we need to do our job very well. Chronic biological damage, infections, parasites, overactive inflammatory response. That was the whole idea of my book, is that what's happened over the last 2,000 years is we've shifted from hunter-gatherers to agricultural, which is the omega 6:3 ratio has shifted, and we're getting a more higher glycemic foods in the diet at that point. And then when we went to the industrial age and we were able to make mass amounts of sugar and white flour, that was another big shift. And then now we're in the convenience food age, and the omega 6:3 ratio is about 20:1 when it used to be 1:1, and we have all these high glycemic foods. We have all these trans fats and anti-foods that are in the diet now. And all of this sets us up to be an over-exaggerated inflammatory response, and it's no wonder that just about every chronic disease is an itis disease, whether you're talking about dermatitis or arthritis, colonitis. We live in a time when we are literally inflamed, and I think in our lives people are inflamed. The relationships are in disarray, families are in disarray, governments are certainly in disarray, and so we live in a time of inflammation, and that excessive inflammation certainly does have an effect. It's very interesting that Dr. Sargon's, David Sargon's book on anti-cancer has a huge section on inflammation, making lifestyle choices that help you cool down your exaggerated inflammatory response. And then we deplete our growth and repair molecules either by poor nutrition, or we're going to hear from Tom Ickham later on this afternoon. We have some really good talks coming up today. Tom Ickham is going to be talking about the role of adult stem cells in cancers, which should be just fascinating. And then yesterday we alluded to chronic emotional and mind-body injury or damage. Stress. I just finished a book club entitled When the Body Says No by Dr. Maté, Gabor Maté. Wonderful book, but it's a bit depressing though, because you begin to see how chronic childhood repressed emotions, chronic childhood abuse and whatnot, it finds its way into many cancers, autoimmune diseases, you name it. So stress, depression, loss of meaning, purposelessness, and loss of human connectedness. This can all these things can set us up for an inability to heal our everyday wounds. So these are all what I would call oxidative factors influencing the outcome of cancer patients, and this is why it's so hard to do a really good study on cancer, because it's hard to find two cancer patients who are alike. The combinations and permutations of all these various things, and if you look through the list, they're all important. I mean, your belief structure is important, family system disruption, financial stressors, comorbid illnesses, poor sleep, lack of fitness, all of these things, prior chemotherapy, radiation, what stage you're diagnosed at, all of these things have an impact on the outcome of your therapy. And so this is why when people say, well, how many patients with pancreatic cancer have you treated? Well, I've treated many cases of pancreatic cancer, but they were never exactly alike. And so I can't always compare and tell people what to expect, because I think it's irrational to think that you're treating the same disease in two different people. So you have to be aware of all these different variables that impacts their oxidative burden. And oxidation definitely is a burden that our culture is attempting to bear. Now here's a part that is kind of new to my thinking, and this is where I'm very sorry that Dr. Schallenberger wasn't able to come, because he's really made me think differently about what's going on. There's even another oxidative burden that we all have to live with, and that is the oxidative stress arising from our mitochondria just in the normal process of living. Damaging free radicals are constantly being generated within our mitochondrial membranes, and that's part of where our electron chain train transfer system occurs. We've got to have it. I wrote a book on energy boosting supplements and talked about the primordial fire, the chi, the Agni that all of us have to have in order to be alive. Well, it's right there in the mitochondria. And we have very important intracellular antioxidant enzymes, which are our defenses for this little campfire that we have, with many little campfires that we have within our cells, from keeping them from going out of control and causing even more oxidative stress and damage. And of course, you're aware of superoxide dismutases, catalase, and glutathione peroxidase. These are very important enzymes that our cells make, but guess what? We need to have energy in order to make these enzymes. So back to our model of cellular health, I've got it slightly, our healthy cells have a slightly reducing internal milieu based upon optimal utilization of oxygen, the production of NAD and ATP for energy. Of course, we have to have water, nutrients, antioxidant enzymes, and a lot of this stems from a healthy lifestyle choice. And if we're doing those things, we can put up with a little bit of this. These are the factors in our life that can tend to take us out of balance. And in general, we kind of call this in general unhealthy lifestyle. Some people seem to have a healthier constitution and can get away with unhealthy habits, but there are those that they can't get away with very much. And it seems like those are the patients that we end up seeing. And so when you have disruption, the oxidation starts to take over, and you start piling up the oxidative stress, and you lose that balance, and the cell signaling begins, and the transcription factors start to roll out of the nucleus, and the inflammatory process begins, and pretty soon you're having a kind of a domino effect where people find themselves getting tired and more inflamed and in pain, and chronic illnesses are beginning to crop up. So there are two examples of oxidation. Good cellular oxidation, our immunity, our ability to make energy is based upon oxidation. And of course, bad cellular oxidation would be excessive free radicals that damages our cell membranes, the mitochondrial membranes, our DNA. We understand that to be an important part of what can cause cancer. But all of our degenerative illnesses arise out of this phenomenon where we have an excessive amount of oxidation signaling excessive inflammation, and we can't seem to get back in balance again. Now, I don't know, Dr. Jackson used to say that Bruce Ames or someone calculated that we have, 10,000 free radical hits to a cell membrane every day or something like that. And there's so many different things that can injure us, and so our cells have to be pretty good at doing repair work. Jack Challam, who's my good friend, he was telling me one of the most powerful free radicals are these advanced glycation end products. And for those of you that do hemoglobin A1Cs, all that is you're measuring the aging of your molecules. And if you have a high hemoglobin A1C, you've gotten stiff from oxidation, literally. So be careful about that sugar intake. So now what Frank Schallenberger helped me to understand is that oxygen is a crucial component. Oh, you know what? I want to go ahead and, excuse me just a second. Someone put in my other slideshow. Hang on. There we go. There we go. Oxygen is really the forgotten nutrient, and it may be the most important nutrient when it comes to understanding this imbalance in the redox reactions that occur at the cellular level. And what Frank helped me understand is that, sure, we're all exposed. We all have about, I don't know, 18, 20% oxygen that we're breathing in, unless we're doing some kind of oxygen therapies. But it's not what you take in, it's what you utilize. This is a theme that Dr. Jackson, who was our former lab director, used to always say, it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb and metabolize and excrete. Well, in another way, you could say that oxygen as a nutrient has to be properly absorbed and utilized in order for us to get the most good out of it. And so if you look at the difference between a 20-year-old and a 70-year-old, it's the fact that a 70-year-old is not utilizing their oxygen as well as they could. So what is decreased oxygen utilization? Again, Frank made a really good comment that I liked, and that is that most of us are probably not antioxidant deficient, because our cells can make antioxidant enzymes. But if we're not utilizing oxygen properly, we cannot keep up with the amount of oxidative stress that's being generated in our time. You can use antioxidants to try to help out, much in the same way that you can use an aspirin to deal with a headache. But if you can improve your cellular utilization of oxygen, you can get more energy, make more ATP, and help your cells make more of the antioxidant enzymes that you need. So the predominant cause of oxidative stress is not a deficiency of antioxidants from our environment, but the fact that our cells cannot properly utilize oxygen, or what Levine and Kidd called functional hypoxia. And so I'm not going to tell you that I have this totally figured out, but I want to let you know that I think there is a vicious cycle of cellular hypoxia that goes on. And if you're not properly oxidizing NADH to NAD in order to make ATP, and your Krebs cycle starts to slow down, and you are reducing your production of intracellular antioxidant enzymes, you're going to experience more mitochondrial injury, and that's going to result in further mitochondrial oxidative stress, and you're going to be caught in a vicious cycle. And what's going to happen is the cells that are most affected are going to start to shift anaerobic, and when you're not utilizing oxygen, you're not making carbon dioxide. And if you're not making carbon dioxide, you cannot do that exchange of oxygen with your hemoglobin, and so it's just going to get worse and worse. And eventually your p53 genes are going to stop working properly, and you need something to kind of get the ball rolling again. Now, where I have a problem with the model, and the reason I put this question mark in here, is that oxidative stress, you would think that that would maybe oxidize NADH to NAD, but it seems not to. It seems that we need an oxidant to get this rolling again, and so I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. So this faulty oxygen transport, with hemoglobin being the primary transporter of oxygen from the lungs to the cells, if you're shifting to anaerobic metabolism in a certain area of the body, you cannot get the displacement of oxygen from the hemoglobin molecule. So you can have oxygen in your blood, and yet the cells that have started to shift to anaerobic metabolism, they may not be getting their share of oxygen. And so you get cellular hypoxemia, leading to even worse anaerobic metabolism. And when that happens, the cell is going to have to shift to glycolytic metabolism. An anaerobic cell can only derive 2 ATPs from each molecule of glucose, whereas an aerobic cell can derive almost 36 ATPs from a glucose molecule. So anaerobic cells are basically tired cells. They're energy deficient cells. And as that occurs, the complex control mechanisms that are necessary for intracellular life, a multicellular being that we are, start to break down. And the cells, as they shift more into glycolysis, they produce more and more lactic acid. And this is why you hear so much about pH and maybe trying to shift the pH. And I've always wondered, is the pH the cause, or is the low pH the effect? And so anyway, cancer patients become more and more acidotic, and cancer cells become more and more anaerobic. And so this is no big discovery, because Otto Warburg, back in the 20s, found out that cancer cells were anaerobic. And he believed that they were anaerobic obligates. And so when you see someone with advanced cancer, they're obviously wasting because of this anaerobic metabolism. You're using up your glucose supplies through gluconeogenesis, and you're basically going to waste away very rapidly. And of course, this is why I tell patients who talk to me and say, well, can I still have my sugar? And I say, well, when you do a PET scan, that's what they're giving you is a radioactive tagged sugar, and your cancer cells are gobbling that up because they're glycolytic, they're anaerobic obligates. And so Warburg did an experiment where he took non-cancerous human cells in a petri dish and deprived them of oxygen. They did survive, but they turned cancerous. It's almost as though when the body is injured for long enough, it's kind of regressing back into a more primitive state of functioning just to survive. Ironically, it ends up killing the organism, but the individual cells are surviving. So what we have here is persistent oxidative stress causing sustained mitochondrial injury and damage with increased oxidation, hypoxia, glycolysis, and acidosis, which turns on a profound amount of cell signaling. Now, if everything's going well, the cell will change behavior. It will induce itself into apoptosis. The p53 gene will go ahead and cause a kind of hara-kiri of the cell, unless it's been so badly damaged. In order for a cell to become apoptotic, it has to basically open its mitochondrial enzymes and have all those free radicals pour out into the cytoplasm, and that's what kills the cell. Well, what if you've already shifted into an anaerobic state? The cell can no longer do apoptosis, and plus the p53 genes have been damaged as well. So this is where the cells start to become more and more cancerous. Now, this is a graph that came out of Steve Hickey's book, but as the level of oxidative stress increases, the cells respond by forming increased cellular division, proliferation. Let's see, my thing just went dead. And so as the oxidation gets worse, what the normal effect is in a wound, the cells that are not going to survive, they will knock themselves out, and apoptosis and necrosis. But if you get enough p53 damage, or if the mitochondria have turned anaerobic, then you can no longer achieve apoptosis, and then those cells start to keep dividing and proliferating, but they do not die off. Now, one of the things that our research department was able to show using this cytokine array is that when there is cellular injury, there is a complex set of signals that come from the cells that coordinate the inflammatory process. And if your nutrient reserves are inadequate or depleted, then this damage cannot be repaired, but the signaling goes on. The inflammatory response heightens as time goes on, and it's kind of a desperate attempt to deal with the oxidative stress that's occurring. And so these are some of the different types of cytokines that Dr. Shalong was able to show that there was a push for more angiogenesis, pro-inflammatory cytokines, differentiation cytokines, oncogene activation, apoptosis. So you can see all of these things that are occurring, and normally there's a kind of balance between these different cell signaling cytokines, but if you've got chronic inflammation that's been heightened because of an inability to repair the damage, you're going to see, once again, you're going to see a shift towards pro-cancerous type behaviors on the part of the cells. And I look upon this as an attempt of the cell to heal, but it's run out of what it needs to heal. It's the non-healing wound. What are the numbers? The numbers, those are the, there was like 147 different cytokines. And so these are the different, there's like 62 cytokines involved with angiogenesis. And there's, my things aren't working here. There's like 69 pro-inflammatory cytokines. And some of the different cytokines have different functions. So that's why you have a number that adds up to be greater than 147. So what Dr. Ming did, he looked at this in terms of what happened when you gave a patient IV vitamin C. And it turns out that the IV vitamin C tends to take this imbalance of cytokines. Oh, thank you, Gary. What it does is it takes this imbalance and shifts it. Let's go back just one more time here. These are all, shall we say, pro-cancerous or wound healing responses of the damaged, sustained injury cells. Whereas these would be the counterbalancing effects, but the body is shifted into a mode to try to repair itself. But if it can't repair itself, what happens? Cancer has the non-healing wound. But vitamin C tends to drive this imbalance back to normal. Even after just one 75-gram IVC, there's a dramatic shift in the cytokine activity back towards normal. He counted there were 22 cytokine activities that were improved after a series of IV vitamin Cs. So again, back to Dr. Hickey's microevolutionary hypothesis. Damaged cells divide rapidly, errors result. Natural selection pressures favor more primitive cells that strive to survive. Multicellular organisms have complex signaling and control mechanisms that are subject to oxidative damage. The damaged cells revert to single-cell survival tactics that involve competition rather than cooperation. So Dr. Hickey has called the cancer cell the selfish cell. It's more like a primitive single-cell organism. So now, if we look at what causes cancer, it's the failure to restore balance after you've had sustained cellular injury. And so in the cancer state, the redox balance stays out of balance. You have persistent disruption. That's why until you get rid of the toxins or until you heal the nutrient deficiency or correct the hormonal imbalance, that disruption is going to persist. And so just giving people a nutrient or an IVC or chemotherapy without changing the underlying disruption, you really haven't solved the problem. And that's why looking at dental factors and all the various causes, underlying causes of cancer, is really an important part of treating cancer using the natural approach. The excessive oxidation signal persists, inflammation escalates out of control, and you have what I call anaerobic cellular regression that occurs. So this is the anaerobic shift to glycolytic metabolism, persistent disrepair, excessive inflammation. The P53 apoptosis gene is damaged or mutated, and then you have uncontrolled cellular multiplication, or the so-called selfish cell. This is the picture of cancer. So instead of seeing it as something, the invasion of the body snatcher, what it is that it's a healing mechanism gone awry. And so we can be upset about that and decry it, but why don't we fix it? That to me is the important thing, is that we're not trying to kill the healing mechanism. We're trying to find out what it needs. Another analogy I like to tell patients, if you've got a crying baby, yeah, you can put a piece of tape over its mouth. I don't think that's good child care. I would rather take the time, and sometimes it takes a little while to figure out, what does this baby need? What is it hungry? Does it need a diaper? Let's figure out what the baby needs, and guess what? The crying will stop. So what happens? These basic healing responses are no longer working properly. One of my favorite authors is Dr. Irwin Stone, and for those of you who can get a chance to read The Healing Nutrient, it's online at the vitamincfoundation.org. It's a tremendous book. It's written in like 1976, and a lot of the things that we're talking about today he was already thinking about and very eloquently putting that down. And there was a tremendous amount of research that existed even back then, but yet it never did quite sink in, I don't think. It takes much more than logic and clear-cut demonstrations to overcome the inertia of dogma and established thought. So Linus Pauling and Ewan Cameron were the first ones to say, hey, what can we do with IV vitamin C for cancer? And they reasoned that this vitamin C is going to help boost immunity. It's going to stimulate collagen formation. Dr. Rubin is here to talk a lot about that. It inhibits hyaluronidase to retard metastasis. It controls the scurvy in cancer patients. It relieves pain and promotes well-being. It potentiates chemotherapy and radiation. And it reduces the side effects and toxicity of conventional therapy. So they saw it as a very plausible adjunct in cancer patient care. They did their study looking at stage 3 and 4 cancer patients. They were giving them 10 grams a day of IV vitamin C, and then they followed that by 10 grams orally. And the subjects survived 6 times longer than matched controls. Of course, as we know, the Mayo Clinic did not really replicate the study. They only gave the 10 grams orally, and they showed no benefit. And so everyone lost interest except for Dr. Hugh and the RECNAC program, which is cancer spelled backwards. Research encompassing novel approaches to cancer. Comprehensive biological research with the intent to discover the underlying causes of cancer, to find non-toxic adjunctive treatment modalities for cancer patients. And so in 15 years of research, there was over 20 scientific articles that were published. RECNAC2 was formed down at the University of Puerto Rico by Dr. Gonzalez and Miranda and Dr. Mora. And they have a very nice review, the Orthomolecular Oncology Review of ascorbic acid, for those of you that would like to kind of look at the history of how this all unfolded. That's a very good paper to read. Oral vitamin C, this is not new information, does not produce blood levels of ascorbate that are sufficient to kill tumor cells. High-dose vitamin C at levels achieved by intravenous administration does demonstrate selective cytotoxicity upon tumor cell lines, and tumor cells become susceptible to high-dose vitamin C at plasma levels of 340 to 400. Well, many of you said, well, where does that number come from? Well, this is one of the research findings, looking at 4 different types of tumor cells. When the culture concentration reached about 400, 350 to 400, we saw selective cytotoxicity on all 4 of those cell lines. And so that's where the number comes from, and this correlates with the dose that we give our patients. So tumors, there was another study that RECNAC did where we grew tumor cells in a sparse monolayer, which I think somewhat stimulates stage 1 tumors, a dense monolayer, stage 2 tumors, and then the hollow tube cultures, which somewhat simulate stage 3 and 4. And so these were dose response experiments conducted at various vitamin C concentrations, and the apoptosis assays measured the extent of cell necrosis. So what we see is in a sparse monolayer, we see that even as low as 200 milligrams per deciliter of vitamin C was sufficient to select preferentially have cytotoxic effects on these cell lines. In a dense monolayer, it was again closer to that 350 to 400. But in the dense hollow fiber tube, we never did really eliminate the tumor. And this is one of the reasons why I encourage patients to think in terms of some type of conventional therapy in addition to, especially if they have a large tumor, that a single tumor, go ahead and have it surgically removed. Do what you can to help us unburden the bulk of the tumor. And then the vitamin C is going to have a better effect if that's all you're going to use. That research produced this particular study, which was, or this paper, which was published in the British Journal of Cancer. And in that same paper, Dr. Kasari showed that by adding alpha-lipoic acid or vitamin K3, it enhanced tumor cell cytotoxicity. Then we have the fine work of Dr. Levine and Dr. Chen, and we heard Dr. Chen talk about her research on high-dose vitamin C and the production of hydrogen peroxide, especially when the vitamin C reached the tissues and acted pharmacologically as a prodrug. And just to kind of review this, we of course know that vitamin C, acting as an antioxidant, will take any free radical and it will donate electrons. and reduce the free radical. The vitamin C is oxidized to dehydroascorbate. You can do the same thing with iron. Taking 2 ferric ions, you can reduce it to the ferrous state with vitamin C. And then in the presence of oxygen, the reduced iron is oxidized and hydrogen peroxide is formed. And so this was demonstrated in the 2007 paper that Dr. Chen and Levine and et al. Did. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and this is the famous picture that was taken from that, and you can see peroxide being formed in the tissues that they demonstrated. Now, we talked yesterday a little bit about the Fenton reaction, and if you take peroxide in the form of in the presence of a reduced iron, it will form the hydroxyl radical. And so if you start putting these things together and seeing this as a cyclic phenomenon, this has been called redox cycling. And as long as you're putting vitamin C into the picture, a continuous infusion of vitamin C, you're going to get production of the hydroxyl radical. And I kind of envision this like a water wheel. As long as you're putting in your ascorbic acid, which is being excreted as dehydroascorbate, you're generating the pro-oxidant.
With all this, is it intracellular, extracellular, and/or in the bloodstream?
It's in the tissues, and that's a very good question. Is it intracellular or extracellular? I think it's probably happening both places, but predominantly extracellular is what Dr. Levine believed in his paper. So in order for this to occur, you have to have a high enough dose of vitamin C, and that was the whole thing about using intravenous vitamin C as a way of generating enough vitamin C to keep this kind of water wheel going. So now let's go back to this model that I put earlier in terms of how this affects the cell's mitochondria. By generating the hydroxyl radical through redox cycling, this improves oxidation of NADH to NAD. So this would be intracellular. And then that can improve your production of ATP, better antioxidant enzymes, decrease mitochondrial injury, less mitochondrial oxidative stress. The cells begin to shift back aerobic, and you have increased CO2 output. You have better exchange, so the cells now start getting more oxygen. This, to me, is another pathway that I think has been missed because we are so pharmacologically oriented in terms of chemotherapy. I think we've looked upon IV vitamin C as a kind of a non-toxic chemotherapy, but I think it may also be working metabolically to help restore aerobic metabolism to the cells so that your p53 function can once again occur, and either the cell can be salvaged, or it can go into apoptosis. Now, in order to make that point clear, I want to reread. I read this to you yesterday at the start of the symposium. But Albert St. George, who was really the discoverer of vitamin C, received the Nobel Prize for it anyway. He kind of got this. This is just a little paragraph, but it really changes my thinking in terms of how vitamin C is working. He suggested that the properties of living systems are all in terms of electrons, which are responsible ultimately for the chemical reactions that drive the organism. He claimed that water is the matrix of life, showing that water mediates and modifies energy transmission, reactivity, and other processes between intracellular molecules. Recent research on water reveals that most water in living systems is not ground state free water, but exists in an excited state, bound, and highly organized as a structural type water. Highly organized water molecule domains required by the living system for structural and functional integrity. This is an energy requiring arrangement, and the mitochondrial electron transport chain provides the organism with a way to energize oxygen and ultimately the water in these domains. In cancer cells, however, this is not possible. By the Warburg effect, a defining characteristic of a cancer cell, metabolism shifts away from aerobic respiration, instead of utilizing the mitochondria to anaerobic fermentation in the cytosol. Despite the continued ability to create ATP, 2 versus 36 per molecule of glucose, the organism loses its way to energize oxygen and the water domain that it depends upon, and an energy leak ensues, fatigue, cellular fatigue. Cell cycle control steps are lost as apoptotic cascades dependent upon high energy oxygen species cannot be produced. As a therapeutic option, high-dose intravenous ascorbic acid has been shown to induce hydrogen peroxide production, which floods and stabilizes the situation. By providing an alternative source of high-energy oxygen molecules, the energy leak is tempered. In the worst case, I like the way he put it, in the worst case scenario, quality of life improves. That's terrible. But in the best case, oxidative potential thresholds are reestablished, apoptotic cascades again unfold, and tumor remission arrives. So we begin to see that IV vitamin C is actually restoring the energy of life back to the cells. It's not just killing cancer cells, it's actually helping cells to once again regain their natural ability to produce energy and to self-regulate. And to me, that's the essence of health. From a cellular metaphor of self-regulation to human metaphor that we all have to self-regulate, because the healthcare system is not going to fix us, folks. You have to learn how to take better care of yourselves. So back to the cancer thing, the microevolutionary model. Conventional cancer treatments kill cancer cells by increasing oxidation, and that does induce apoptosis, but it also creates a heck of a lot of damage. And you may end up winning the battle but losing the war when you use too much chemotherapy. And that's why Brad Week's presentation on IPT, allopathic homeopathy, was very interesting to me. Damaged apoptosis control mechanisms such as the p53 gene allow therapy-resistant cells to emerge and multiply, especially with excessive chemotherapy. And that's why chemotherapy will work for a while, but very often it eventually fails and the patient suffers all the more. So an ideal redox therapy would do both antioxidant work, which helps to repair these apoptosis controls, and pro-oxidant work, signaling DNA initiation of apoptosis in damaged cancer cells, oxidizing NADH to NAD to restore aerobic functioning. So putting this all together, here are what I consider the 7 steps that lead to cancer. So oxidative stress, injury, and oxygen underutilization cause a progressive anaerobic shift. This is Warburg. Sustained cellular energy leads to excessive inflammatory cytokines. So the inflammation is an attempt to heal, but it's not working, and so the inflammation escalates, which causes the cell to change behavior. But the behavior that normally it would do when it can't fix itself, apoptosis, due to the oxidative signal, well, that gets damaged. And excessive DNA damage and mutation with shift to glycolytic metabolism results in the loss of the p53 control of apoptosis. And therefore you have excessive oxidation and inflammation, which promotes uncontrolled cellular proliferation, which is what most people understand cancer to be. The intracellular, the injured multicellular tissues undergo malignant transformation. There's regression back to the selfish cell. And then cancer stabilizes in an anaerobic metabolism with angiogenesis factors feeding it, aggressive cellular proliferation, metastases, and then body wasting. It's just the typical picture of cancer that we see. But this is where it all started, was back up here. Now, what does the Riordan IVC protocol have to offer here? Well, IVC rebalances redox because of its bioxidant properties. It detoxifies and removes disruptions. It treats with the hydroxyl radical generation, which can have both selective cytotoxicity, and Dr. Chen showed us how it can augment conventional therapy, Or it may be oxidizing NADH to NAD, thereby restoring aerobic function. It controls the inflammatory cytokines that I showed you. And it promotes whole cell energy restoration. So you have aerobic mitochondrial functioning beginning once again. It's kind of funny to talk about vitamin C as having bioxidant properties, and Dr. Levy will be the first to tell you, no, it's not a bioxidant. It's an antioxidant, but in the presence of reduced iron or reduced copper, it generates a free radical. So it's not exactly a bioxidant, but it does create those properties in the large doses. But what the antioxidant does is it mops up the free radicals, modulates cytokine-controlled inflammation, and promotes the formation of healthy collagen. The hydroxyl radicals can healthy cells neutralize the peroxidase, the peroxide with the catalase, and the cancer cells that lack the catalase, that's where you get your apoptosis. Okay, from here it gets a little more practical. So how do we include people in the Riordan IVC protocol? Well, Poincaré said science is built upon facts as a house is built with stone, but a collection of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. So we need to put these together in a coherent way to help our patients. So there's 5 types of patients that we see that are interested in IVC, and probably one of the most common types, unfortunately, is those who have failed standard treatment regimens. And so we're trying to do catch-up work with these folks, and they've already got a lot of damage, and so they're tough to work with. But I always, when people say, should I try it? Well, I say if you can walk in and have an IVC, we may be able to improve your quality of life, and at the very least. And so I usually, if they can make it in, we'll at least try, because hope is a very important part. Even if there is very little hope, patients need to have a chance to have those last moments with their families be reasonably intact. And I think that's one of the real gifts of IV vitamin C, is that their pain levels go down, they wake up a little bit more, things are definitely better even if they don't survive. Patients seeking to improve the effectiveness of their standard cancer therapy, I think this is a huge area. I think IV vitamin C really should be a part of every regimen that is offered to cancer patients. Patients who want to decrease the severity and carcinogenicity of side effects from standard therapy. Patients attempting to prolong their remission with health-enhancing strategies. You know, metaphorically, coming in once a month and having an IVC kind of reminds people how important it is for them to do something to take care of themselves. It's a kind of a symbolic statement of their willingness to be involved in their own self-care. Patients who have refused standard therapy yet want to pursue primary alternative treatment. We don't turn anyone away. You know, there are many people who are extremely fearful of chemotherapy or conventional therapy, and certainly we're going to help them the best we can, though I do encourage patients to work with an oncologist. Some of the contraindications, those who are unwilling to sign a consent to treat form. I think people have to know that this is not conventional therapy. I think from a medical legal point of view, I think it's very important that you have them sign a consent form. If they've got really significant psychiatric illness that they can't cooperate, that would be an issue. Severe congestive heart failure, you know, there is a fairly significant sodium load that goes along with IV vitamin C, and so if they're in heart failure, if they've got huge effusions or fluid overload, you need to be aware of that. Renal insufficiency or failure can be a contraindication. G6PD deficiency can result in hemolysis, or if they have an uncontrolled comorbid medical condition, you need to be aware of that. For example, hemochromatosis, since vitamin C will enhance iron absorption. So these are the things that Dr. Hinshaw mentioned last night: doing a chemistry profile, CBC, G6PD, UA, vital signs and weight, complete medical history and physical exam. Try to take the time to get their op reports, pathology reports, procedure reports, so that you can, if anything, maybe consider having them be restaged, because very often when you do get a really good response on IV vitamin C, the oncologist will say, oh, well, they were misstaged, or they had a spontaneous remission or whatever. So it's important to kind of know where you're starting from, especially if you're doing it as part of a research project. Tumor markers, CT, MRI, PET scans, bone scans are really helpful to know where you are and later on down the road to see what kind of progress you've made. Prior cancer treatments, it's important to know that and what kind of side effects they've had. Precautions and side effects. I just threw these little quotes in. These are some of my favorite little quotes. We are usually convinced more easily by reasons we have found ourselves than by those which have occurred to others. That's one of the reasons why when I first started at the clinic, Dr. Riordan said, don't do anything to a patient that you haven't tried yourself. So vein irritation, infiltration, shakiness, we usually just add a little more, give a little calcium push afterwards. We'll take care of that. Sometimes having people eat a meal beforehand is good. Vein irritation, I've given my wife over 350 IVs in the very same vein with no problems. I call it my old faithful vein. Yeah.
Is the vitamin C, is that the 20 days half-life, for the venous blood?
No. The venous blood, the question is, does the vitamin C stay at that high level? Probably in the tissues it might stay for longer, but not at the really high levels. The plasma levels are pretty much out of the system in about 2 or 3 hours. So it's a...
Then you can do glucometer.
Yeah, then you could do glucometer later on that day. So osmolality issues, you want to make sure your infusion concentrations are less than 1,200. We have done them higher than 1,200, but that's when people are more likely to have nausea or headaches or potential side effects. Rapid tumor necrosis was reported by Pauline and Cameron, but we have not seen that very often ourselves. I don't know if all of you guys have seen much tissue necrosis, but most people, I don't know, we've not seen that to be a big problem. So this is just the chart that we calculated in terms of how we mix our IVs, and the main thing to notice is that all of these osmolalities are way below 1,200, and so some of the patients we've been trying to give their IVs a little faster in order to get a higher peak level, because that can affect your post-IVC. But some people can't tolerate a really fast IV, so you have to kind of individualize. There was a phase 1 study done about 5 or 6 years ago that the Puerto Ricans did publish, where we were giving continuous IV 10 to 50 grams per day, so it was coming in very slowly, so it never did really hit a very high peak. There was no toxicity, no changes in their chemistries. The plasma levels only went up to about 20 milligrams per deciliter, but it was just a way of showing that, that the vitamin C was safe. The administration of the vitamin C, for successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. So this is not a public relations scheme. People were asking, how do we do it? Well, when Dr. Riordan first started doing IVCs, the vitamin C vials came in a 7.5 gram vial. So he gave people 2 vials, and that's where the 15 grams came in. And you don't really find those too much anymore, but we still kept the 15 grams. It's kind of by tradition we give people a 15 gram vitamin C. We know a lot about it, and I'm going to show you a little research thing we did. But the second day we give them 25 grams, and the third day we give them 50 grams. And after each one, we do a post-IVC saturation level to kind of find out what their oxidative burden is. And then that can give us some points on the curve to figure out where they ought to go home. If they're not from Wichita, we want to send them home with a recommendation for whichever doctor they're going to go to. So we draw the post-IVC saturation level immediately upon completion of the IVC, or within about 10 minutes. You draw it from the vein on the opposite arm. You have to use proper specimen handling and shipping. I would suggest sending it to a lab familiar with doing dilutional vitamin C levels, since it's going to be such a high level. And the post-IVC result can be correlated with tumor burden, staging, and concurrent conventional treatment plan in order to set up a dosing plan for the IVC. And so just to kind of demonstrate that, we just pulled, I don't know, it was about 20 charts somewhat randomly, and we had 12 people who had no cancer. We had 3 people who had kind of a stage 1 local. We had stage 2, 7 people that were kind of a regional metastasis, and then 8 people that had distant metastases. And these were their I averaged out their post IVC saturation levels, and this is what we found is that healthy people after a 15-gram vitamin C have about 150. And remember that the normal plasma C level is about 1 to 2, 0.6 to 2. And so just doing a 15-gram, you're jumping it up about 100 times normal, up to around 150. But someone with local, just a local, maybe a small tumor, a stage 1, that's going to increase their oxidative burden just a little bit. Stage 2, higher oxidative burden, and of course, stage 3 and 4 are going to have more oxidative stress. So you can see that by just looking at that first post-IVC, you kind of get an idea of how much oxidative stress their body is under just from that alone. So what is our typical IVC protocol? Well, I put typical in quotes because we're not hard and fast on this. It kind of varies with what the patient's situation is, but generally twice a week for the first 6 months. Some people will only go for about 3 or 4 months, but if they can go 6 months, it's better. Weekly to complete the 12 months, twice a month for the second year, and then monthly thereafter. That, I've not done any research on that, so I can't tell you that that is the magic formula, but I can say that it's a good one, and that in general the people who follow this do better. And I have a number of cases where people stop doing their IVCs, and usually 6 months or a year later they can have a recurrence if you have not corrected the underlying causes. If they have not done their homework in terms of dietary change, detoxification, lifestyle modification, it's going to come back because the pre-existing conditions are still there. And so, but this, when people are doing, this is this interesting thing. I've always heard that don't prescribe vitamins because people are going to use that as an excuse to eat more poorly. This is what I've heard. In reality, people who come here and go through the testing and start taking supplements and working with themselves, I see them eating better. In a similar way, people who do their IVCs on a regular basis, it's a little reminder to them to kind of stay involved in the healing process. Work at getting well. Don't just assume that your body is fine. And I like what Gary had said about doing those panels of different markers, because I think that can be a great motivator for people to stay involved. I'm going to skip this one. Okay. One of my favorite quotes from Sir William Osler: "The greater the ignorance, the greater the dogmatism." Judith Stout, we're just about at the end here, folks. Judith Stout published a nice little thing in a bibliography in the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine, where she showed that by reviewing the literature that antioxidants do not protect cancer cells against free radical and growth inhibiting effects of standard therapy. On the contrary, they enhance its growth inhibiting effects on tumor cells, and they actually protect the normal cells against adverse effects. Charles Simone, The Truth About Breast Cancer: Antioxidants enhance treatment kill rate and reduce treatment side effects. Lots of studies to back that up. It involves some 8,500 patients, 5,000 of whom took antioxidants. 4,700 of the 5,000 showed increased survival. And antioxidants not only reduce oxidative stress, but they may be part of what's helping to restore aerobic metabolism. CoQ10, for example, may be a very important part of restoring aerobic metabolism. And then, of course, Abram Hoffer. We just can't say enough about his contribution. In many ways, it was his encouragement that led to Dr. Riordan doing the RECNAC project. He had really 1,000 cases of people that he followed that he had them use an oral program, but very high doses of vitamin C. And then I think he was using what I call redox synergy. If you get enough antioxidants working together, you may be able to take that dehydroascorbate that's being formed in the redox cycling and recycle it back again as ascorbic acid. So he's credited with being the person who got Dr. Linus Pauling interested in vitamin C. So let's look at the conclusions here. Well, first of all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident. I have a sense that we're kind of somewhere between the second and third stage. I'm hoping we'll get more into the third as time goes on here. So a rational treatment for cancer rebalances redox, removes disruptions, treats with oxidation, controls inflammation, and restores whole cell aerobic metabolism. Well, IVC rebalances redox. It detoxifies and removes disruptions, and it treats with the hydroxyl radical, and it controls inflammatory cytokines and promotes whole cell restoration. By the way, did any of you pick up my little subliminal thing that I've had on all these slides? IVC. It's right in the palm of your hand. Okay. Summary slide here. The Riordan IVC protocol addresses cancer in a comprehensive way. It boosts immunity, stimulates collagen formation, inhibits hyaluronidase, relieves cellular hypoxia, and restores aerobic metabolism, restores mitochondrial functioning, including apoptosis, inhibits angiogenesis and reduces tumor nutrient supply. It corrects scurvy. It's immune activating. I guess I mentioned that. It supports detoxification systems in the body, relieves pain and promotes well-being, potentiates chemotherapy and radiation, reduces side effects and toxicity of conventional therapy. So, would you say it's a plausible oncologic adjunct in cancer patient care? I wouldn't say that. I would say it's a premier oncologic adjunct in cancer patient care. Of course, I'm biased. Irwin Stone basically said that, when you look at the fact that all animals make their own vitamin C, except for humans, primates, guinea pigs, and some bats, and maybe some salmon, vitamin C production in wild animals markedly increases with illness, injury, and infection, or any kind of stress. Wild animals don't have veterinary clinics that they can go to. So what do? Well, they make more vitamin C. Well, cancer is man's most challenging chronic illness. That could possibly be debated. But IVC can restore to humans nature's universal response to stress, high-dose vitamin C. So together with optimal nutrition and sound medical care, the Riordan IVC protocol can greatly assist in the optimal care of the distressed cancer patient. Thank you very much.